then he's like, okay, I have to make sure that your pulse,
He was checking pulses
in your private area
to make sure that they were okay.
is intact.
The accusers may be different.
Just relax, just relax.
Takes his hand,
He still did not have gloves on.
with no gloves on still.
But their accounts of what they say happened to them inside the Cumberland Children's Hospital are very similar. These former teen patients are 2 of 30 alleged victims who are suing the hospital, its owner, and former medical director Dr. Daniel Davidow for more than $241 million. The complaint claims Davidow, who was forced out of the hospital in February 2020, would fraudulently check a female patient's femoral pulse and, quote, place his hand beneath the minor patient's undergarments and sexually abuse the minor patient.
In pediatrics, it's important to assess a baby's femoral pulse as a critical way to pick up on congenital heart disease, especially in the newborn period. We continue to assess it during those early exams.
Dr. Melissa Nelson is a pediatrician unassociated with Cumberland Hospital. CBS 6 spoke with her, and we reached out to the American Academy of Pediatrics on when it's appropriate for a doctor to check for a femoral pulse. A spokesperson said, quote, in AAP guidance for pediatricians called Bright Futures, palpating femoral pulses is mentioned as part of the physical exam during infancy visits, but there are not specifics included on how or when exactly this is done. The last visit that a femoral pulse check is listed in an exam in this Bright Futures pocket guide is 9 months. The guide spans from newborn through 21 years old.
I've been a pediatrician for 20 years, and I have never seen an indication for doing a femoral pulse exam on an adolescent.
Through the Freedom of Information Act, CBS 6 was provided more than 200 documents from the Virginia Department of Health and the State Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. We've learned state health officials were aware of numerous sexual assault allegations against Davidow prior to the CBS 6 investigation, which preceded the medical director's termination. According to this state report, from January 2019 to February 2020, 8 incidents involving Davidow were reported. That's almost half of the total number of sexual misconduct complaints made against Cumberland staff during that same time period. Regarding the Davidow complaints, at the time this report was generated, it indicated that 3 were unfounded, 1 screened out or did not meet the statutory criteria, 1 was suspended or put on hold, and 3 of the cases were pending. Those complaints detailed alleged inappropriate touching of females in the groin area. Citing privacy concerns, state officials were unable to give us the current status of these complaints. CBS 6 shared these FOIA documents with State Senator Siobhan Dunavant, an OBGYN who once served on the Virginia Board of Medicine.
That was outside the standard of care, and that, I taking care of women, I take care of teenage and even younger women, I haven't taken a femoral pulse since I was an ICU nurse, and we were in an emergency and really in a code situation or something along those lines. That's when I think that's relevant, because you can't find anything else.
In the spring of 2017, 5 female patients said they were inappropriately touched by Davidow, which led to a New Kent County Sheriff's Department investigation. In an April 13, 2017 New Kent police report, Davidow explained that during his exams, he is rating the patient on Tanner scale, which is based on certain developmental characteristics of breasts, genitals, and pubic hair, which is why he checks the femoral pulse on both sides. The report states he can also feel for pubic hair development in order for him to scale the patient. New Kent County investigators would ultimately find the allegations were unfounded.
And I have to say, of everything that you sent me, that was the most disturbing and concerning. So Tanner scale and hair growth is a visual, not a tactile assessment. So that would not be the proper way to assess what he was looking at.
When I hear about an adolescent who's having femoral pulses done by someone without gloves on and doing it regularly and also feeling their pubic hair during that assessment, I've got a lot of flags going off, and they're not good ones.
CBS 6 would later learn that days before our first investigative report aired, the chief clinical officer of the DBHDS expressed multiple concerns about Davidow.
Not only is it a law here in Virginia, hearing the stories and the investigations and the details, it is also a moral obligation to ensure that I can do what is in my ability to do to ensure that it doesn't continue.
Dr. Alexis Saplaska filed this complaint with the Department of Health Professions after an interagency meeting January 30th, 2020, where, quote, CPS provided accounts of over 12 allegations of abuse, physical and sexual, by Dr. Davidow. In the complaint, she'd write, quote, Dr. Davidow in Cumberland Hospital does not meet an acceptable standard of care, and this places vulnerable children and families at medical risk.
My intent really for putting this complaint in was that I don't feel that this is a person who should be working with highly vulnerable youth who don't have the ability to articulate exactly what has happened to them.
Saplaska says DHP investigated, but she was advised the Board of Medicine would not initiate disciplinary proceedings.
Were you satisfied with the ruling?
No, I was not. I think when there are such egregious allegations and a complaint to the detail that I provided, I think there is an opportunity to continue to dig deeper and ask more questions of the person that is providing that complaint, and give feedback, about the kind of ultimate verdict, whether or not it changes that, it could possibly lead them towards a different action.
In your opinion, should Dr. Davidow have his medical license?
No.
Do you feel like you did everything in your power to see that happened?
I guess from a legal regulatory standpoint, perhaps, but I would like to know if there is something else that I could do. And if there is, I would be the first one to do it.
Davidow still holds an active medical license and has not been criminally charged. Meanwhile, Senator Donovan says she's committed to doing whatever it takes to ensure kids in the Commonwealth stay safe.
But I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, and I'm concerned about our children in Virginia anyway, because this is a big issue, and there are a lot of incidences at this hospital, and it deeply concerns me. Everybody in the state is looking at this and trying to make darn sure that they have an assessment of what happened so that they can know it and hold people accountable where appropriate.
CBS 6 reached out to Dr. Davidow through his attorney, and they declined to comment due to pending litigation. The Board of Medicine declined to comment as well, citing confidentiality laws. Much more on WTVR.com. Working for you, Laura French, CBS 6 News.
The current lawsuit is unfortunately more of the same thing.
9 former Cumberland Hospital patients suing the New Kent Children's Hospital, its owner, and former medical director Daniel Davidow for more than $147 million for physical and sexual abuse.
We have a young boy who was at the facility, a teenager, who was strangled and choked out by a behavioral technician. We have others who have suffered other forms of abuse or maltreatment while they're at the facility, things that unfortunately we've seen repeatedly
like these 8 female plaintiffs, all accusing Davidow of inappropriately touching them while in his care inside the facility he was forced out of in February 2020 after a CBS 6 investigation into abuse and neglect claims against hospital staff.
That individual, according to all of these young women, is placing his ungloved hand underneath their clothing and touching them in their intimate body parts underneath their waist. And so we have now more than 24, more than 36 consistent accusations of the same conduct from young women that have been there not just in a 1 or 2 year period of time in which they could have come together and decided what to say about this man, but over a decade of young women who say the same thing has happened to them.
According to the new complaint, Davidow fraudulently stated that he needed to check the minor patient's femoral pulse to coerce the minor patient's compliance with his demands. The suit details graphic sexual assault allegations dating back to 2009. CBS 6 sat down with Dr. Melissa Nelson of Pediatric Associates of Richmond, who is not affiliated with this case.
In pediatrics, it's important to assess a baby's femoral pulse as a critical way to pick up on congenital heart disease, especially in the newborn period. I think the last time I would check a femoral pulse is probably around 6 months of age.
All 8 of Davidow's accusers claim they were first abused upon admissions, and 3 of them say it involved an invasive exam.
Would it ever be appropriate to do a femoral pulse internally in the vaginal area?
I can't think of any indication to be doing an internal femoral artery exam. I don't know how you would even do it.
And one complainant alleges that Davidow was not wearing gloves at the time.
Would it ever be appropriate to do a vaginal exam without gloves on?
I would never do a vaginal exam without gloves on. I've been a pediatrician for 20 years, and I have never seen an indication for doing a femoral pulse exam on an adolescent. So when I hear about an adolescent who's having femoral pulses done by someone without gloves on and doing it regularly and also feeling their pubic hair during that assessment, I've got a lot of flags going up, and they're not good ones.
Since October 2020, 47 former patients have filed suit against Cumberland Hospital, seeking more than $388 million. Of those, 38 are accusing Davidow of sexual misconduct.
This was supposed to be a place where you got better. This was supposed to be a place where they sent you to get care, to get treatment, to improve your life. But really what it was a prison. We, within the legal system, need to be able to demonstrate to these young women that we're going to uncover the truth.
Dr. Davidow has not been criminally charged. He and the other defendants in this case declined to comment on the complaint due to pending litigation. The Virginia State Police and the New Kent Commonwealth Attorney's Office both tell CBS 6 their investigations are still ongoing. Working for you, Laura French, CBS 6 News.
Working for you, CBS 6 News at noon starts with a breaking news alert.
Thanks for joining us here at noon. I'm Cheryl Miller. That breaking news out of New Kent County, where the former medical director of a children's hospital has been officially charged with sex crimes. CBS 6 problem solver Laura French has been investigating abuse claims against the doctor and other hospital staff members for several years. Laura now joins us with the very latest details on these new indictments. Laura?
Well, Cheryl, a New Kent grand jury has indicted Dr. Daniel Davidow on 4 felony charges. That includes 2 counts of aggravated sexual battery of someone who is incapacitated and 2 counts of object sexual penetration by force. Investigators say 2 of those charges stem from an offense that took place October 16, 2017. As CBS 6 has previously reported, Virginia State Police launched an investigation into the hospital on October 17th of that year. Davidow was terminated from the hospital in February 2020, shortly after a CBS 6 investigative report detailed some of the accusations he was facing. Since that time, 47 former Cumberland patients have filed lawsuits against the hospital and the company that owns it, seeking more than $388 million. Of those complainants, 38 are accusing Davidow of sexual misconduct. We spoke with their attorney, Kevin Beniazin.
This is the right place to start. Ultimately, our justice systems have to work together. That's criminal justice and our civil justice system. And for 2 years, for longer than that, we believe that they've been behind on justice, behind on pursuing what our clients are most passionately looking for, which is accountability of this individual. And this is the beginning. It's certainly not the end, but we're happy to see, and we're grateful, frankly, more than anything, to see that there is some action being taken to finally hold this individual accountable criminally for what he's done.
Davidow becomes the third Cumberland employee to be criminally indicted. Psychotherapist Mickey Hardin died by suicide in February 2021, the day prosecutors said that he was to plead guilty to a sex crime against a former patient. Now, later that year, behavior tech Stacy Burrell was convicted of burning a nonverbal patient with hot water. CBS 6 reached out to New Kent Commonwealth's attorney Scott Rennick. He just released a statement acknowledging the indictments and said the alleged crimes occurred at the hospital, but offered no further comment. Now, coming up tonight at 5, reaction from the alleged victims. Working for you, Laura French, CBS 6 News.
A Henrico doctor accused of sexually abusing 2 teenage patients has been released on bond. I'm Candace Burns.
And I'm Leland Pender. The prosecutor in this case says more criminal charges could soon be filed against Dr. Daniel Davidow, the former medical director of the Cumberland Children's Hospital in New Kent County.
Tonight, an update to a nearly 3-year-long Problem Solvers investigation. Laura French talks exclusively to the former lead state police investigator in this case.
I didn't think it was ever going to happen.
Shock and relief from this former Cumberland Children's Hospital patient after learning the former medical director, Daniel Davidow, has been charged with sexually abusing her and another teen at the New Kent facility.
No matter how arrogant he was, or is, thinking that everyone's going to believe his lies, you were finally caught. And you deserve it. You deserve everything bad.
Last month, a New Kent County grand jury indicted Davidow on 4 felony counts of aggravated sexual battery and object sexual penetration. Over the last 2.5 years, CBS 6 has traveled to North Carolina and Florida to interview the alleged victims about what they say Davidow did to them during their stays at the hospital.
And then he's like, okay, I have to make sure that your pulse in your private area is intact. So he takes his hand with no gloves on still, and he puts his hand under he unbuttons my pants, puts them under my pants, under my underwear.
And he had me slide down my pants, and then he grabbed my underwear actually and pulled them down. And I was obviously very tense because it's a very uncomfortable situation. And he was like, just relax, just relax. And he still did not have gloves on. Stuck his fingers inside of me, and he claimed that it was, he was checking pulses.
Davidow was terminated in February 2020, shortly after a CBS 6 investigative report detailed some of the abuse claims against him. Since then, 47 former patients have filed suit against the hospital, seeking more than $388 million. Of those plaintiffs, 38 accused Davidow of sexual misconduct.
There are dozens and dozens and dozens of victims, and it floors me that he still has his medical license.
In an exclusive interview, CBS 6 spoke with retired Virginia State Police Senior Special Agent Marcy Clifton, the lead investigator in this case from when it began in October 2017 until she retired for medical reasons in March 2020. Clifton interviewed both accusers and dozens of other former patients.
I've been working on this case for so long, and even though I'm retired from the state police, it's still, I think about it every day. And to hear that he was finally going to be, brought to justice it was very emotional.
As it was for the alleged victim KJ, as she's named in the indictment.
I remember just like looking up and there were tears in my eyes.
During some exams, she claims Davidow would sexually assault her while she was heavily medicated on an antipsychotic drug.
And I had just received a dose of Thorazine. He's like, get up on the table and pull down your pants. And I was like, why? Why do I need to do that? I don't have any medical reason. You would need to be doing these, because this had been probably less than a week since my admission date that he was doing this again. And I remember I got up on the table and I could barely even move because I was, first of all, scared, but I didn't know how to express it, and I was very drugged and very out of it.
Almost every child that I talked to was given Thorazine. Some of the interviews that I did would haunt me at night. Some of the more egregious, especially the ones where the children would talk about being on these high-powered drugs and sexual things were being done to them, and they felt paralyzed or trapped in their own body, and they couldn't cry out and they couldn't move. That's some of the things that bother me the worst.
Under the Freedom of Information Act, CBS 6 obtained this Department of Health Professions complaint submitted by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services Chief Clinical Officer Dr. Alexis Aplaska. In it, she mentions over 12 allegations of sexual and physical abuse against Davidow and the improper use of drugs like Thorazine. The Board of Medicine did not take any disciplinary action. Aplaska spoke to CBS 6 back in June.
Most of these kids were administered Thorazine, which was discovered in 1950s. It is a very sedating and strong antipsychotic, and when used now, used for adults with very serious, psychotic symptoms, and that's not what these kids had.
I have a very strong feeling and belief that I was put on it, so I wasn't able to object to things. I, was sedated. I was not myself. I couldn't say no or stop him when he was doing something that I didn't like. Or
what would your message be to all of these alleged victims? Because as you said, there's dozens.
There are. I heard them. I loved them. When it actually comes down to it, I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be there.